Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is George Stimson, and he's recently wrote a book with second edition. Title of the book is Goodbye, Helter Skelter, a new look at the Tate-Labianca murders. And this is not his first book. He's also written the Cincinnati Crime Book, also the Iron Cross 1 First Class, and War Merit Cross First Class with Dietrich Mertz. And his website is you can see some of this book and some other books he's associated with. One by somebody we're going to talk about, which is goodbyehelterskelter.com. But this book he has a lot of very personal firsthand information about what's known as the Manson family or the Manson murders, and he can talk more about that. So George Stimson, are you there?
You're cutting out a little bit, so I hope you can hear me.
Okay. Yeah. I hear you fine. I think that there's something going on. Anyway, did you hear my whole intro?
No, I didn't hear all of it.
Okay. So again, your website is goodbyehelterskelter.com.
Yes.
And the book is titled Goodbye Helter Skelter, a new look at the Tate-Labianca murders. And again, the name of the author is George Stimson. So George, thank you very much for being on the show. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. For people who don't know your background or haven't heard about this book, can you talk about how you became associated, when you talk about it in your book, how you became associated with Charles Manson and what got you interested in the subject of the Manson murders?
Well, I had an interest in true crime for a long time, ever since I was a kid, and there were two high-profile crimes in the town I grew up in, Cincinnati, which kind of affected me at age 10, 11, and 12, and that was going on. So I got very interested in true crime, why people are killing each other. The two main things that interest me are why people decide to commit murder. And then the other thing that interests me is the police methods that they use to track down murders. So I started reading books about murders generally. And of course, I came across Helter Skelter eventually in 1975, I believe. And it's a very interesting case. So I just kept reading about it and following up on it and more, reading every book I could get, magazine articles or television interviews, anything like that, and just researching it more and more as I was curious about the case, because the official line of the Helter Skelter motive never made sense to me. That was the main thing that didn't make sense to me. There were a lot of other things in the book that didn't jive with, for example, my experiences in the counterculture. So there were a lot of questions I had about the book that I just kept looking for answers. And eventually I got to meet some people who knew Manson, and they introduced me to Manson. And so I got to meet him and came out here to California and visited him in Corcoran Prison, California State Prison in Corcoran, almost 200 times. So, and speaking to him on the phone and corresponding and continuing my research, meeting people, going places, reading court transcripts for oral hearings, all sorts of research. And finally, I put it all together in my book, which is offers an alternative motive for those crimes, which, in my opinion, exonerate Manson of those crimes, because the big issue with Helter Skelter was that was supposed to be his personal motive for the crimes. And it was the demonstration of his intent behind the crimes. And legally, you have to prove intent to get a first-degree murder conviction. And the reason that they needed to get the Helter Skelter motive was because, absent it, there was no other evidence that he had any intent to commit the crime. So the Helter Skelter motive, whereas you don't really have to prove motive in a court, you do have to prove intent. In this case, they used the motive to prove the intent. So if you take away that motive, you've removed intent from the legal equation, and therefore he shouldn't have been convicted.
Right, and he was never... Right, according to the facts, he was never at any of the crime scenes, the Tate-Labianca crime scenes. So,
well, he was in the LaBianca house, so he was there. I mean, he
not at the time of the murders, though, right?
No, he left right before that. I mean, he was cutting it pretty close. But yeah, you're right. He wasn't there when the murders happened, but he was in the house shortly before the murders happened.
And you have a lot of personal quotes from Manson. Can you talk about kind of how your relation with him developed?
Well, I wrote to him out of curiosity, as thousands of people do, or did rather. And he responded to me because I was able to refer to some mutual acquaintances that we had, so he could, relate to that and ask them about me and find out a little bit about my character before he invested his time in me. And we just got together when I came out and started visiting him. I always treated him straight and was interested in him and wanted to do things to help him out, because he'd been a terribly wrong person in the way he was convicted and been demonized for decades as the devil incarnate. But I got along with him very well and had fun. That's pretty much how I got to know him. It's just a process of seeing him again and again, talking to him on the phone hundreds of times. Those quotes came from taped telephone conversations over a series of years. I think we had 150 90-minute tapes, which is where I got most of the quotes. A lot of the other quotes come from interviews and other television programs that other people did. So lots of information. I like to, when I'm writing, rather than me explain what a person did, I would rather have the person explain it in their own words. So I'm always looking for that kind of source material when looking at a person's motivations.
Right, and that's important. I think that's one important aspect of your book, is that you have all those first-person statements of these people involved in this very well-known event. And right now, your book has 108 5-star reviews on Amazon, so it's very well received. Wow. Can you also there's pictures of you with Manson, like your sense of him was different than this kind of boogeyman media sensational sensibility that would be in the public. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, even before I met him, I kind of had a feeling that he would be a person that I could get along with. And he was very easy to get along with as long as you were straight with him. And so he was very easy to get along with. I mean, he had a lot of pressures he was under and concerns that I didn't have. So, we had totally different backgrounds and living circumstances, he being locked in prison and me not. But generally, for the most part, we got along perfectly well.
And so you kind of unraveled a lot of these elements of the case, this shooting of the black guy, Hinman. You talk about kind of how the family grew. Right. Can you talk about how your perception of that may be different than Bugliosi's sensibility in Helter Skelter?
Well, again, he's looking at the case as the Tate-Labianca murders, and I see the Tate-Labianca murders as being chapters in a series of events that happened that summer, starting with the Crow shooting. It was as I'm trying to get across in my podcast, it was a kind of momentum-driven story. Events happened and they piled up on each other. It's a complicated case. I mean, there are so many characters and incidents and places involved. It's hard to distill it down easily, especially if someone listening to you doesn't know all the references you're referring to, like names and places. But basically, Charles Watson set up a burn of Bernard Crowe. Crowe called the ranch when he realized he'd been burned and talked to Charles Manson, and Manson went to try to straighten out the situation and ended up shooting Crowe and thinking he'd killed him. So he thought he had killed somebody to straighten out Charles Watson, who they called Tex, his problem. And so Tex owed him that. And so there was that debt of you owe me, and up to the point of taking a human life, because that's what I did to help you and help all our friends here. And it was the same, similar with Hinman. That was another deal. There were a lot of variances to the motivations of why people did things where I disagree with Bugliosi, for example. He says that Manson shot Crowe just because he would do it, and he's a crazy killer and would be happy to shoot anyone. Whereas in my view, he was doing it to solve a problem not of his own making, and that it was a pretty much instance of self-defense, which if you look at Bernard Crowe's courtroom testimony, he says, I was advancing on him, I was getting ready to go after him, and Crowe was a considerably larger man than Charles Manson. I think he weighed close to 300 pounds when Manson is a small, I mean, I'm 6'3", so I consider him a smaller man. He wasn't 5'2" by any means. That's another one of the myths out there. There's so many myths and misrepresentations about Charles Manson in this case that really you can almost go on about it forever.
Right. I mean, but it made Bugliosi this Helter Skelter thing. Possibly, I think it's the number one selling true crime book ever written. So
Yeah,
there's that
yeah,
over. Sorry, please
yeah.
continue.
I believe I've heard over 7 million copies worldwide, but that figure is probably 10 years old. So who knows how many now? But he was handed a case that basically I don't think anybody else wanted it, because the minute Manson was arrested, he had to be convicted, because if you just look at the press coverage of it, this image that he was the one calling all the shots. He was the oldest person. He brainwashed these people. So the idea that he would possibly be acquitted was really unthinkable. So they had to find something to make it look good enough to get a conviction. And that's what they did with the Helter Skelter motive.
And
It
you kind
sounds good it sounds good until you start thinking about it for a few minutes, and then you go, well, no, that's not right.
and what can you state the name of your podcast for me again, please?
It's the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. I try to
Podcast.
keep everything simple.
Gotcha. So you can see it on iTunes, so people can go back. But also, your book shows kind of a different, more nuanced view of what's known as the family. Like they literally had, I think it was Manson's first child together, and you said
Yes,
that kind of was one of the bonding. They had multiple bonding events that kind of
right.
coalesced the group, right?
The birth of a baby into your group, that's kind of expanding it beyond this generation, really, and looking towards the future. And you're almost like a miniature community when something like that happens, and everybody witnesses and they're a part of it. So definitely, the birth of the child, I think, was one big unifying uh, thing for the people who were there to see it.
And also the shooting kind of Manson gets Tex Watson into his debt. So you're seeing these personal relationships kind of binding together. And
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say he got him into his debt. I mean, he was in his debt. If you go out and do something and you say, George, would you please go take care of this, and I go there and it gets out of hand and I have to really take care of it, you owe me whatever I had to do to take care of it. I'm not luring you into anything. You know, I'm straightening out your problem. If it didn't work out the best way, that's not my problem. That's your problem. You created the problem. I was trying to solve the problem.
and you also kind of say that Hinman wasn't really kind of some kind of innocent player in this whole environment. Is that, would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know what you mean by innocent player. I mean, that's another instance where Bugliosi says that Manson sent people to Gary Hinman's house because he heard he had an inheritance and that he was just simply going to go take it from him, no matter what it took to get it, even kill him if you have to. Just go and get his money, which is really an idea that's suddenly moving to strong arm robbery, where murder is the instrument you use if you have to. But Gary Hinman, according to most evidence, including testimony from Bobby Beausoleil, who actually killed Hinman and Charles Manson, supplied a mescaline to Beausoleil, and he took it to a biker gang, the Straight Satan's Motorcycle Club, and they didn't like the mescaline. Either it was bad or they weren't used to it. As he said himself, it was really not a good idea to give mescaline to a motorcycle group because they're used to beer and downers. So they might have thought it was bad, and it could have been perfectly good. But in any case, it's a misunderstanding. And when Beausoleil went back to Hinman to get the money, things got out of hand. He had been threatened by the Straight Satan, so he had a level of violence in the affair before he went over there. He didn't just go over there thinking, I'm going to beat this guy up. They had roughed him up at the ranch, so violence was already in the equation before he even went over there. And so Manson came over there, and there's so many different versions about what happened from different people. And unfortunately, as in a lot of cases, is this case, people change their stories and they're not totally forthright. So you have to really look at everybody's statements and recollections and testimony and weigh them with their credibility in regard to things they've said about other things. And a lot of times it's difficult because people like Susan Atkins and Charles Watson are just not very credible people. Their stories have changed so many times that it's hard to determine what to believe. So you really have to dig into it. You can look at court transcripts. You can look at testimony as reported in newspapers to see what people said and try to determine, a way things happen that makes sense. I always want to try to do it that makes sense and not go with some far out theory or off the wall, one chance in 1,000 that this happened. I believe in Occam's razor, the simple solution is most likely the good one, is the correct one.
And you mentioned their books in there. Susan Atkins has a book. Tex Watson did his own book.
Right.
You've had a relationship with Lynette Fromm, I think, published her book for her.
I know her, yeah, yes.
And so there's this relationship with the Beach Boys, too, kind of a notorious part of the story. Can you talk about their relationship and how that kind of played out? And Manson's, he had some desire to become a music star or become in the music business, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, he plays music. He's a musician. And from my take of it, a lot of people, they say, oh, he wanted to be a rock and roll star. And that resonates with people because probably most people would like to be rock and roll stars themselves. So they identify with that. But honestly, I think when it came to him, he was just being himself and playing music and playing his own songs and not really entertaining his friends, but just playing music around them. And if somebody said, gee, you might have a chance of being recorded, I can understand. Certainly, he went into a recording studio to recording songs, so he was interested in it. But I think he looked at the whole thing and how Dennis Wilson lived and all the intrigue in the industry and decided it wasn't really for him. So I think that this notion that he really had his hopes up about it is overblown, and that he was angry because it didn't work out. I don't think that any of that's true, really. I think that's something they put out into the mainstream mind because most people would say, well, of course he wanted to be a rock and roll star. Who wouldn't?
Right. But I mean, that really is like supposedly one of the central motivations for the Melcher House, right? Is that.
Well, yeah, that is. But I mean, the revenge on Melcher deal, I think that the simple solution is that Tex Watson had been to the house before and knew the layout, and that's why he picked it. And sure, he had been to the house before when it was Terry Melcher's house, but I don't think, Watson was the leader of that crime. He's the one who did that crime at Cielo Drive. Manson told Watson to do something. Bobby Beausoleil had been arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. And that, again, gets more involved when you go back and look at the Hinman murder as to why that happened. Manson told me that the reason it happened is because after he cut Hinman's ear, Hinman said he was going to go to the police, and Manson told him, I'm going to have to kill you because I'm not going to let you go to the police, because if you do, I'm going to go back to prison. And so Hinman said, okay, I won't go to the police. So to Manson, your word is your bond. That's what you said. That's what you're going to do. Manson leaves. Hinman decides he is going to go to the police. And Bobby Beausoleil said, no, you gave him your word that you're not, and I'm not going to let you. And Bobby Beausoleil killed him to keep him from going to the police. And, there are more shades and versions of things. And it's so easy with this case, when I start talking about it, to think of some tangent and go off and forget about what I was talking about originally. But basically, that's it. I mean, this case it's really like an onion that they peel it and it keeps getting bigger.
Right, but there's so many. It's really become what you could call it a cottage industry or whatever. Right. It's an industry in itself. So many books have come out of this that don't even have any first person analysis or contact or anything like that. So it is important. And there's been other books. I've had another guest on called about the Manson case, Operation Chaos, which we can go into later. But I mean, your thoughts about that. So Hinman, can you talk about what you really think happened about the Tate and LaBianca murders? I mean, what's your kind of general impression?
Well, Bobby Beausoleil had been arrested for the Hinman murder on August 6th. And I don't know when the people at Spence Ranch found out about it. I don't know when he got a phone call, what the charges were, who he called, who knew what when. But we know that he was arrested on August 6th, I believe at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and that the people at Spence Ranch went out to Cielo Drive on the evening of August 8th. So just over 48 hours later. To me, there's a big cause and effect there. I believe that the motive offered, the alternate motive offered during the trial from the very beginning was that they were trying to commit copycat murders to think that the killer of Gary Hinman was still at loose and that therefore the police would release Bobby Beausoleil. Now, I'm not putting that forward as a brilliant motive. It's very flawed, obviously. and it didn't work. But that was why they went out, to kill people, to make it look like the same killers. That's why they used it. They wrote, Bobby Beausoleil wrote "political piggy" on the wall over Hinman's body in his house. So they wrote "pig" on the front door of the Tate residence, the Polanski residence, to make that the similarity. Death to pigs in the LaBianca house to bring in the similarity. But you had different people doing it. Tex Watson at the time is also a self-admitted user or abuser, if you will, of amphetamines for about 2 to 3 weeks before the murders, in a violation of Manson's supposed orders that you weren't allowed to have speed on the ranch. So much for everybody doing exactly what Charlie says. But I think that explains a couple of things. One is that it doesn't let you think clearly. I don't know if you have any experience with amphetamines or people who use amphetamines to excess. They don't think clearly. And also, it explains the ferocity of the attacks. The multiple stab wounds, 51
Overkill,
wounds. Yeah, overkill. It's just out of control. Again, it's almost, you would have to really understand it. I think you would have to do speed for 3 or 4 days and see where your mind was at. And how dark is your soul? How black are you inside? You know?
And Tex Watson had a history of drugs. Like, he was dealing drugs and being involved in drug culture, drug burns, right? So he wasn't he wasn't innocent. I mean, he wasn't clean, I guess, as far as the drug world was. I think you said that in your book, he was making a living off selling LSD and speed, right?
Well, I'm not saying that he was doing that. I don't know how well he was doing it if he ended up back at Spahn's Ranch. You know, Spahn's Ranch was a magical place. I've heard talking to people who were there, but at the same time, it was a rundown place on the edge of town where you could live and kind of blend into the woods and the rocks and everything and live. And you didn't have to do a whole lot to get by.
Right, and that was kind of their choice. They all kind of chose to be, all these women and stuff chose to be with Manson in that kind of counterculture dropout lifestyle where they lived like that in abandoned homes and things like that. You show that in your book, up in Topanga and things like that. Why do you think that? What about Charles? I think you write about some of the stuff in the book, but what about his personality that you saw, that he had that kind of ability to really attract a lot of people into his group?
You know, he was very alive. He was very fun. I couldn't believe how much good he could make out of the situation he was in. He was always seeing what he could do. He was always interested in doing things. A very active, alive person. So I think people recognized that in him, and they wanted to be around him, and they wanted to be like him. He was very self-assured. He was self-centered, not self-centered, but I mean, he was grounded in himself. And I think a lot of people admired that and wanted to be like that. He was very resourceful. He took care of people. He could find them things. You know, I've seen things where they say, well, Charles Manson would find out what you want, and then he would supply it to you, and that's how he would manipulate you. Well, no, that's just what somebody who cares about you does. They find out what your problems are and try to solve them. There's so much that Manson did that was not exactly innocent, but not nefarious. That's been given this evil tone to it. Like, everything he did was some scheme and some scam, and he was always trying to figure out how to use people. And he was just totally not like that.
Yeah, he's entered the world's kind of scape as one of the great villains. Like, he's in these shows on Mindhunter and stuff like that as an exemplar. Did you see anything about him, or thing about, like, people like are trying to ascribe to him kind of mind control or Scientology? Did you ever sense anything from him, or learn anything about his reading? I know that he liked Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land. Did any of his kind of philosophical sensibilities, or where he got his philosophical outlook, where that came from? Do you ever sense that or learn about that?
I just missed about the last 10 or 15 seconds, I think.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that he's an interesting person. He seems to have had an interest in Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. And I know that according to Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, he was clear on Scientology. So did you ever get a sense of kind of his philosophical underpinnings or
You know,
background or what he read?
that's a misrepresentation of what I don't think that he had too great of an interest in Scientology. He was exposed to a little of it when he was inside, but that whole thing about being clear. I was talking to T.J. Wallerman, who was with Manson when he went into the Scientology Center in Hollywood, and he wasn't claiming to have reached clear. He was just asking, "What's after clear?" I think they took the inference that he was implying that he was at clear. But his question, I think, was more like you say, the universe is endless. And then you say, well, what's after that? Or, it's certain, they say something like, well, there was a certain time when time began. Well, what was before that? So he was just saying clear, what's after clear, meaning, well, once you reach the top, then what?
Right.
So it was kind of taken to misrepresent that he was saying, well, I've reached clear, now what? But he was just kind of mocking and questioning their dogma.
Gotcha. And what's your connect? I mean, you talk about what Ed Sanders' book, I think it was the Garbage People. I can't remember the title, but they took the family. They took out the second chapter of the relationship to the process. Did you sense or see any kind of process connections in your relationship to Charles Manson?
No.
Nothing.
No, I think a lot of that's really overblown. He would naturally be curious about different thoughts, but he was pretty much on his own, in his own mind, and not looking for anyone else to tell him how to do anything or how to react. He knew.
Yeah, because I think Bugliosi said the two process members went and saw him in the jail or something, and then he claimed
Well,
up.
they might have done that because they were panicking, and who knows? It's just like Esalen denying he was ever there, and everybody wanted to disassociate themselves from him.
Right. So he was at Esalen like a week before the murders, right? Or a couple weeks?
I think it was a couple days before, maybe 1 or 2 days before.
Wow. And so why do you think that they went all the way up into kind of the high desert of Death Valley for a while with this whole before the winter came? Can you talk kind of about their interest in really going out there into the wilds and what brought them back?
It's an amazing, beautiful place, and if you know where the water is and you know what you're doing, you can get by very well. So I've been there when the ranch was still there, and it's certainly an attractive place that somebody would want to be.
Right, and I think you said in the book, like you went out there too, or you kind of traveled around.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
great place.
And so you kind of have had some relationship, not just with Charles Manson, but also with some of the female people who are involved with him. Can you talk about that?
I don't really want to talk about personalities because anything I say can be taken and misconstrued, and it's just my opinions. The two main people I've known are Lynette Frumey and Sandra Good, and I just can't say enough about their loyalty and honor. Is just remarkable, and they're both very bright, creative people. I don't want to get in too far beyond that, but they're not, and they're also certainly not people who are following, if you will, Charles Manson and doing his every bidding. That's totally not happening.
Right. And they've become, I mean, it's not just Charles Manson, it's also those women. I think it was Van Houten tried to get out of jail parole and they wouldn't let her out.
Well, that's all political, and that's also Bruce Davis, and I think Bobby Beausoleil got approved for parole once, but that's just the state of California. They're political prisoners, basically.
And Beausoleil's, my understanding is he's kind of not doing well, right? Isn't he in the hospital or was in the hospital? I don't know if you know anything about that.
I don't know.
And what do you think the motive was for the LaBianca killings?
Well, I think they were trying to create a series of killings, copycat killings, to throw the police off the trail of Bobby Beausoleil. So they went out to Cielo Drive the first night, and then they went to Waverly Drive the second night. And why they stopped after that, I don't know. maybe they were worn out. I mean, those are two intense nights.
Right. And what are your thoughts? I mean, you've seen some of this other. Like I interviewed Tom O'Neill about Operation Chaos. Did you ever
Mhm.
get a sense that Manson had some? I mean, there were kind of weird things happening in California at that time. And you actually, I think your second chapter really goes in detail about the '60s and how turbulent that was. Did you ever
Mhm.
get the sense of some kind of an intel operation or some type of favoritism for Charles Manson?
No, I read on Neil's book. I finally had to because so many people were talking about it. I think that the I didn't see any of that connection between him being at the free clinic and hanging out with the people that were there supposedly involved in all these intelligence operations. And let's see the other part of that question.
Well, I think his view is that there was the whole there was a whole car theft operation, or there was something Charles was involved with stealing cars, and that he got away from that,
Oh
and it's
yeah,
kind of
okay, I see.
inexplicable.
Yeah, I think I was interested to read in O'Neill's book when you're talking about Charlie's parole officer uh, was basically not a full time parole officer, and he didn't have many clients, and he was just doing it as a temporary job while he waited to do something else, and he just uh, by chance got hooked up with Charles Manson, and he liked him. So I think he saw that in situations where he could have revoked his parole, that it wasn't really necessary and counterproductive. So I don't think Charlie was being shown any favoritism by up on high. I just think that by a stroke of luck, he got a good parole officer who gave him a lot of breaks and liked him, which is understandable considering his personality and how likable he was. And also, the situations were not, a lot of times these penalties are not warranted based on whatever the offense is supposed to be.
And can you explain, like, and my understanding is that Manson was much more networked and much more friendly to a lot of people in Hollywood before the Tate-Labianca murders. Can you talk more about his kind of associations and network at that time?
Well, he's a person, and he's interested in people, and he's interested in what they're doing, and he's very interested in people. So, I mean, I would think anybody he met, he would associate with, and unless they were totally repulsive to him, he would be around a lot of people, and probably a lot more people than admit, now or then, who want to distance themselves from anything having to do with them. So it's hard to tell with that who's telling the truth about what happened.
Right. And I mean, you met him and talked with him mostly when, I think, all the time when he was in jail. How did you think that he adapted to, like, Corcoran's right in the middle of nowhere? It's right in the middle of the state of California.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what he was like in jail?
Well, he was jail, really. I mean, that's the whole thing about him. He's totally institutionalized for his whole life. And when I first saw him in the visiting room when he wasn't behind glass, I could almost feel the prison vibration radiating off of him. He came walking out, and I just looked at him and I thought, this guy is prison. And that's what he is. He's raised in institutions for most of his life. That's where he got his values, from guards after World War II, who are ex-servicemen, teaching him about hierarchies and protocols and procedures. And he learned all that. And he knew it his whole life. And that was his background. People on the outside, maybe they don't have strong people giving them values. But he was in there for years and learned all this stuff. And he applied it to his life and to the lives of the people around him.
And I mean, there's kind of like his Atwa kind of views. What are your thoughts about his kind of return to nature kind of sensibility? Did you guys ever talk about that?
Well, that's one of his primary interests, if you will, is the environment, and much more so than any thought of being a rock and roll star or anything, because he realizes that that is the most important thing above politics and everything else. People are just starting to wake up to that now with all their panic about climate change, but he was aware of that, and the people around him were aware of that when they were out over 50 years ago.
Right.
They lived or wanted to live out in the desert, I think, is because they appreciated how far somebody could go on how little resources that you could use by careful management and respect of water, air, land, that you could really make it work instead of abusing it and trying to milk every last penny you can out of everything.
And do you kind of take that position that his whole, or the alleged kind of race war, kind of Armageddon going into the tunnel out in the desert, a lot of that was fabricated or just not true or over
I think
emphasized? Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that, a lot of people sitting around have a lot of conversations about things. And Manson is certainly one who engaged someone in conversation and say, what do you think about this or that? And I'm not surprised that given the times with the racial unrest at the time, like it is now, that people wouldn't think that and talk about it, certainly. And certainly hypothesize about what might happen, and this might happen, and that might happen. But as far as it being his guiding philosophy, it's not like that. I don't see that he was. Sure, he might have said, well, there's going to be a race war and this and that and the other, and we can hide out in the desert until it's over. I'm sure things like that must have been talked about. I mean, the Helter Skelter concept did come from somewhere. I'm not saying Bugliosi made it up. If they were talking about a final war and calling it Helter Skelter, that very well might have been happening at Spahn's Ranch. But that doesn't mean that Manson was preaching it and promoting it all the time, and much less trying to instigate it. I think more than anything, they wanted to get away from it. And then when you see where they went, that's pretty good, solid evidence that that's what they wanted to do.
People are talking about Civil War right now, so I mean, we're kind of. I mean, those 60s were rough years. Let's see. We're at about 36 minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or anything I missed before we wrap it up about your book? Because we didn't cover everything. There's a lot more.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I say, there's a lot that you could talk about. I'd like people to read the book and see. As I said, I'm trying to present a level-headed, common sense explanation of what happened that fits the evidence that we know about. I don't like to talk and speculate about a lot of things we don't know about. I think we should look at things that we know happened, true things, try to take those events and put them into some kind of order so that you can get some understanding about why these crimes happened. But why they happened is not what most people think. When I started writing the book, I thought, nobody believes the Helter Skelter motive is true, so why are you even doing this? But then I realized when I looked around in media that even places like the New York Times supposedly suspected, that's a Freudian slip, supposedly respected media outlets were still putting it forth. So it is a that most people have. And to look back on the things that happened through that lens is, it's a distortion of what the reality was. And so I'd like to there are many other alternate theories of the crime, and most of them are very conspiratorial, and people take this clue and that clue and try to string them all together. Whereas if I see a piece of evidence or a clue that doesn't fit, well, it doesn't fit because it has no relevance. So I think that the version of the crimes that I put forward is the closest one to the true one. And I'm not saying that I answer every question or cover every little discrepancy or can explain every little odd happening. But I think, as I say, if you look at it with a common sense point of view, that's what I try to approach this with more than anything. It's really common sense.
Gotcha. And I mean, do you mind taking a few questions, George?
No.
Here's one. It's from We Steals Plato Snakes. Did you ever hear anything about Dr. Julian West from the Monarch program treating Manson, as well as Jack Ruby or Timothy McVeigh? Did you hear anything like that?
No.
Nothing. So no Julian West, because that's kind of the central premise of Operation Chaos is Julian West and Sidney Gottlieb and all that stuff. So you never saw any of that. No. So Manson never mentioned Julian West either. Huh?
Oh, no.
Nothing. And
I mean, if he did, it must have been in the middle of some rambling, something that I didn't pick up on. But we certainly didn't sit around talking about it ever.
and
I wouldn't say that in over almost 200 visits and hundreds of phone calls, he never said Jolly West, but I didn't pick up on it.
I have a question. During your research, you kind of came across other Manson researchers in Nicholas Schreck and Anton LaVey's daughter, correct? So do you find that their views were similar to yours? Did you find them helpful, or what's your kind of thought on their take? Because I think they adopted kind of a more of a cult kind of Charlie Manson kind of view. Is that true? That's a two question.
Well, I mean, they certainly helped me because they almost introduced me to Manson, so that was a big foot in the door, and I'm very appreciative to them for that. But Nicholas and I, as he put it, we have a gentleman's agreement to disagree about certain things, and that's about as far as I want to go with that.
Gotcha. And you worked with Adam Parfrey. I think he just passed away too. So
I didn't. I met Adam. I didn't really work with him, but
okay.
I met him on. I saw him. I visited him up in Oregon and at his publishing house, and met him in L.A. once.
And you're saying that Manson was not a Scientologist, right? That's what we talked about earlier. So no, Manson was not a Scientologist. So some of this stuff on Bugliosi, like there's a lot of stuff that's very questionable. Going back and reading that book, and I think that's a central part of Operation Chaos too. Is like there's some stuff in there that Bugliosi was. It's like Bugliosi has some very questionable, stuff. Like his other books, are fit for some analysis and questions.
Yeah, people bring up about things about his life, and I suppose it's a reflection on his character. But I don't like to dwell on that stuff. I'm more concerned with how he handled the case and his attitude towards Charles Manson. So a lot of people bring up stuff about Vincent Bugliosi's personal life that are not really of any interest to me. I mean, they do, I guess, give an insight into his character, but I wouldn't use them for anything I'm doing because they're not really. I think I can get enough with just seeing how he handled Manson's case, but I don't have to go any further than that. Look for things.
Well, I agree with that. But his take on the Kennedy assassination, which is, it was just one guy, is pretty incredible, in my opinion.
I didn't see it. I haven't read all his books.
Well,
you're a couple of them, but
you're probably much more fortunate. So where is the best place to get the book Goodbye Helter Skelter?
Well, you can get it on Amazon.com, and it is in bookstores, but you can also order it directly from my website, www.goodbyehelterskelter.com. And if you do, I will sign it. So that's a little extra that you won't get with Amazon.
Let's see if I can pull up your website right here. There it is right there. Goodbye Helter Skelter. So you can see the reviews. Contact information's there as well if you'd like to reach out to George Stimson.
Right.
One more question. Did Charles ever talk about Tex Watson? Did you ever hear anything mentioned while you were with Charles Manson?
He said that Tex kept his word and Tex paid him back, and he had no problem with Tex.
And there's a lot of pictures in this book too. You can see a lot of pictures of you with Charles Manson hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there it is there. Yeah, so it's great. So again, and mention your podcast one more time for me. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
It's called the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast, and I put it up on Podbean has it, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and it's also up on YouTube. So you can just go to YouTube and look it up. I think I've got 5 episodes up so far.
Gotcha. And again, the author's name is George Stimson. Title of the book is Goodbye Helter Skelter, a new look at the Tate-Labianca murders. And it was just published, I think, 2014 and then redone in 2019. Mm-hmm. Currently has 108 5-star ratings on Amazon. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Stay there.